Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Maine Department of Education virtual professional development opportunity. My name is Joe Schmidt, and I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. Today, I am super excited, and I don't give three supers all the time, Kathy and Cheryl, so you should be super excited as well. Very excited to have Kathy and Cheryl from the Library of Congress here with us today. Those who've frequently been in some of the office hours and other PD know that I've kind of been talking about this one for quite a while, that we've been working with the Library of Congress and potentially the Right Question Institute to kind of do a little series of pieces. And this first piece here is kind of Library of Congress 101. What do you need to know about accessing the Library of Congress? Kathy is going to run the show for us, but she tells me that Cheryl is the expert. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves and take it from here.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm glad to see at least a few of you sipping beverages. I have my water handy. I'm flattered by the description, just a little bit of my background, mainly so that you know the lenses I bring to this. My background is teaching English, particularly high school, and a little bit of community college. I know a fair bit about teaching writing and preparing particularly persuasive and argument writing. So those are the lenses I bring. I've worked with a lot of social studies teachers, which it looks like it's a fair chunk of you. Reading the chat, it looks like that's not all of you though, so that's pretty exciting. And the Library of Congress pretty much has something for everybody. So some disciplines work a little harder for this. And so what I have planned, Kathy, go ahead and advance 2 clicks. So this is the Library of Congress Capitol Hill campus, and I put it that way because we outgrew Capitol Hill with our 3 buildings there. And I'm going to, just to save bandwidth, I'm going to stop video because you've seen me, and welcome to my basement TV room. This is one of the strange things, right, is we're visiting everybody in home in our professional roles. And so far my bandwidth is okay, but I'm gonna stop the video just to help make sure. We outgrew our Capitol Hill space with our 3 buildings there a while back. And so we also have buildings in Culpeper, Virginia, where we store our motion pictures. And we have offsite storage that is an amazing compact storage site. Somebody in the office sent around an article from some library in Britain where the cleaner had done a deep clean and reshelved all the books according to height. And we were ha until I pointed out that's exactly how they store them in our offsite storage. They're stored by size to take advantage of every possible inch. What you're looking at here in the middle of the screen, the building with the green roof and the dome, is the Thomas Jefferson Building. What you probably think about if you think about the Library of Congress. And just a quick plug, we'll be doing an online tour of that space today at 2. And I'll, later in the program, I'll show you how to join that if you're free at 2 for that. So just I like to orient people to where we are directly across the street from what you're looking at. The front of the Jefferson Building faces the Capitol Building, and off to its left, you would see the Supreme Court if you were on it. And I love the convergence of the seat of learning and knowledge and the seat of justice and the seat of law. So just a quick orientation to that. And I'm so glad to see that at least one of you has been to see us live. Kathy, next slide, please. Here's what we have planned for you today. We're gonna do a foundational primary source analysis just to apply some strategies, give us all some groundwork. Sounds like some of you have more experience than others. Then we'll pause and talk a little bit about, so starting with that foundation, how can you build and extend primary source analysis and learning? And then I'll show you some approaches to finding resources from the Library of Congress online. So let's get started with just a quick couple of tours of possibility. This is the library's homepage, and there are several places in this slideshow where we'll orient to the library's homepage, and they'll look different in different slides because, as you can see by the left and right pointing arrows, this is one of those carousels that switches around. So I did a couple of quick searches on Maine, and so the first thing I'd like you to show you is just going, I've blown up the drop-down menu, and the first search I did was on prints and photographs, and I just a quick snip of some possibilities here. About 3,000 pictures of Maine, and if you're looking at near the top of your screen, you'll see a series of oval boxes. Those indicate the facets that I checked from the left side. So original format, photo, print, or drawing. I wanted them to be available online. I made the location Maine because I quickly was reminded that in addition to your fine state, Maine was, for example, the name of a ship that was sunk. So I've added some changes to this. As you can see on the screen, there are other ways you could limit the search if you wanted to. So if, for example, you were looking for pictures from a particular time era, you can limit by date. And this should be familiar. It's pretty standard web functioning. In addition to these images, I also did a search on maps, just because I wanted you to be aware that we have lots of different formats. And if you think back to the drop-down list that I expanded a couple of slides ago, there were a lot of different formats that we have materials in. I like maps and photos as starting places because they're visual, and that levels the playing field, as it were, for lots of different learners. Learners who might struggle with language and text can often access things in visual materials that they might miss in text. So what I'd like to do next is model quickly just a few slides of the general approach we take to primary source analysis. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to stop talking for about 30 seconds, and I want you to just look at the picture, and then at the conclusion of 30 seconds, start entering in the chat what you notice first, and keep this as much as possible observational, things that most people looking at this image would agree that they're looking at. So I'm going to stop talking for about 30 seconds and just invite you to take in this image. That's been something like 30 seconds. So if you would, use the chat to just note, what did you notice first? And I appreciate those of you who are beginning to give the answers, to respond in the chat. I have a strong preference for respond rather than answer, but I don't always remember that when I open my mouth. Neil, I'd invite you to add some details to help us see what you're looking at when you say that you think this is a softball game. What details in this? Kristen notes that it's a black and white image. A Star, I don't know who you are, but A Star notes that they're playing baseball at recess at school. Some details for that interpretation. What, for example, makes you think this is a school? What makes it you think it's recess? Bree notes that it looks like a baseball game because they're in uniform. And I'm going to come back to this answer if I remember. And Kathy, feel free to remind me that I said that. Lori notes that the men seem to be wearing uniforms with rolled up sleeves and wonders if maybe it's hot. Kathy, if you would click back, you're in one more, there you go. That's a great place. And Lex notes there is something on the ground by her feet. Jen notes that there are people playing the game and they have different uniforms than the people watching. Thank you, A Star, for adding some details, noting that the building in the background looks like a school and they look like maybe middle school age kids. Mrs. Corriveau takes a different tack and says the adults have uniforms, and then question mark, or excuse me, parenthetical with a question mark, military. So you have two different interpretations. Kathy, if I could have the next slide when you get a chance, please. Two different interpretations of what you think is going on with this. And that's where it's really helpful to ground those interpretations in what you're seeing. Charles adds that this looks like a mixed gender team with a woman at bat, and the women have long skirts, and there appears to be a uniform, maybe set as a community gathering, but not sure, and the bat looks different from the one used right now. There's a lot in that response. I also see, you guys are talking so fast that I'm having a little trouble keeping up with the chat, which is wonderful. That there are, Lex notes there are buildings in the back, one has big windows and some have porches. In response to the question currently up on the screen, which was, why do you think this image is made? I have a couple of different responses, a promotional piece, question mark, and Lori, I'd love it if you would add some of your thinking around that. Jen agrees and adds maybe to show fun, and again, what in the image would make you think that? Krista notes that this is a photo of a black and white photo. You can see the outline of the picture and doesn't seem to be attached to anything like a news article. Yeah, that's interesting observation, and I honestly am not sure if that's how the object itself is or if that's just how it looks from the scan. If I were able to get into the building, I could probably go down to the prints and photographs division and ask them to pull the original. Charles speculates that this image might have been made as a demonstration of an activity that would include everyone. Craig, on the other hand, says maybe it's just a candid photo. Crystal's adding some additional speculation. This could be a military base in Oceania, and I'd be really interested in what details or what prior knowledge you have that leads you to ask that question. And there seems to be some difference of interpretation between several folks thinking it was made as propaganda or promotionally, and some of you just saying it's a casual picture, just a candid. I'll introduce in a few minutes the information that travels with this, but part of my teacher process, if I can step out of the activity for a minute, and thank you for playing along as the good students that you are. Part of my teacher process is to give you plenty of time to engage with the item itself before adding any information that is known about it. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So the last question is simply, what do you wonder about? You've spent a couple of minutes talking about this item. What do you wonder about? What questions do you have? Go ahead and add those in the chat. Thank you for starting us off, Lex, with where is it? Charles adds, what year is it, and is it in the US? Dawn, along the same lines, where was it taken and what time period are we in? Lori wonders about the age of the people pictured here. And Lex adds that as well. Questions about the children standing off in the background. Are they waiting to play? What's the story behind it? Why did they take it? Why are they playing baseball? These are great questions. And part of the excitement of learning with primary sources, and part of what makes it different from learning from a secondary source, is secondary sources tend to be set up to provide answers to questions. Primary sources are more likely to spark questions themselves and launch inquiries. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and show you my office is very accustomed to doing this. So on the next slide, what you'll see is I've used this picture a few times, and this is how my office mates, you can see the sticky notes with different handwriting. This is how my office mates responded to this image, to the two prompts, what do you see and what do you wonder? And you can see assorted approaches that people took. And this is one way that if you were not in a position to do facilitation in real time, if you're teaching asynchronously, or doing a do now as people walk into class, you could literally just have people put notes on the item, either using paper sticky notes or digital possibilities for that. The next slide shows you these same responses sorted into categories of responses. And this is our stock primary source analysis tool. Many of you said you didn't have a lot of experience with the Library of Congress. So let me offer you an introduction to this very, very simple 3-column approach of observe, reflect, and question. And these are obviously not your answers, but observations are responses that most people looking at it would agree and see the same thing. Reflections include interpretations, inferences based on prior knowledge, based on what's observable. And then questions are just that. They are questions. And some of them that you see recorded here are questions that you are asking yourselves. I'm going to pause and invite you. We seem to be a pretty small group, so if you're able to unmute yourself and share, we can take a few voice responses. If not, feel free to use the text chat. But my question for you as teachers is, why is it important for your students to be able to distinguish between an observation and a reflection? I think most people get questions pretty easily, so for time we're going to not tackle that one, but what's the value of helping your students understand the difference between an observation and a reflection? And Joe says everyone can unmute yourselves. So text or voice, whatever is most comfortable to respond to this. Not yet, Kathy, not yet.
I'm sorry, I'm having major issues.
You're fine. If you can, when you get a chance, go back to the 3-column graphic organizer, that would be fabulous.
Oh.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen, for bravely kicking us off. Observations are visual facts. A star underscores an observation is something that everyone can see. Reflection is, and Craig adds, a reflection requires a level of critical thinking and insight. Observation, objective, what you can see. I too am a BHP. I'm not sure what a BHP is. I'm sorry. I'm slow on acronyms, and I still call myself a federal employee. Observations are just what is seen, and the observer doesn't use any of their own bias. That's an interesting response. And always, of course, you think about bias in everything that you're consuming. Observations are facts. A reflection is how that unfolds in your brain. I have to think about that answer. Nobody has ever responded that way. And I really appreciate getting these different insights into your thinking on this. Any last minute chat conversation about the value of distinguishing between observations and reflections and helping your students do that? And observation has to do with the five senses. Yes, that may help some students situate that difference. A response much earlier that I said I was going to come back, and I forget exactly how it was, but I do remember that Bree typed it in, and Bree gave a response that was an observation matched to a reflection. And part of the value of matching an observation and a reflection is it gives some insights into the thinking that's going on. Oh, a behavioral health profession, someone who works with children. Got it, thank you, I really appreciate that. Then the bottom part of this analysis tool that we haven't talked about is launching a further investigation. And one possible question, and there are many possible questions, but for the purposes of keeping this going, one possible question is, so who plays baseball? Let's continue on possible paths for investigating. So Kathy, if you could pull up the next slide. This is the information that travels with the object you were just studying. The title is American Soldiers in India have taught these Burmese nurses to play softball, and they report the girls make good competition despite the long wraparound skirts, which interfere somewhat with their base running. That answers some of your questions about who these people are, about how old they might be-ish, probably not middle schoolers, and where it is. It's in India. Now, down in the notes, you'll see that the image source is the US Army. And down below that, just the third line in the notes, it says transfer United States Office of War Information Overseas Picture Division. And I just want to sit back and let you rest with that for a minute. What does that tell you about why this was made? I'm not going to spend any time on that because I think you'll get there pretty quickly. Let's guess that those of you who are saying this was made to be persuasive or as some propaganda, you were on the right track. Yeah, the age is deceptive in this because they do look young, and I still don't know who the people in the background are. Based on this information, there's still some questions unresolved, like what were the people back by the building doing? I'm not sure. We know that these are soldiers and nurses, but we don't know who the other folks are or why they're gathered there. So let's dive into some possibilities for finding materials that you can use for your varied interests. I snagged this straight out of this baseball primary source set, and I'll show you in a few minutes where to find these primary source sets. We have about 3 dozen of them.
Yeah, Cheryl, if I may break in for a second,
Please.
I'm having some challenges, and I can't get to the Word document for all the URLs. So I promise when we are done with the slides, I have all of the URLs to send to the participants through the chat. So, so we'll do that at the end of the program.
And Kathy, if it's okay with you, I can post when this gets all done. I'll put up the video and then any accompanying resources you want.
Yeah. So we can do these slides as a PDF and they're linked. So we'll be in good shape.
Perfect. And Kathy, fun fact, that's why I asked you to drive, because the last time I did a Zoom, I had trouble seeing the chat and I had trouble finding links.
Yeah.
And so I have set you up to
succeed.
I have freed myself to just talk. So thank you for that. But as Kathy and Joe said, we'll make sure you have all of this. So one of the great things about the primary source sets is if you find one on a theme or topic that you're teaching about, it's a terrific starting place. So for example, we might start, as we just did, with a single primary source to activate prior knowledge or to give students information that they need to have front-loaded or to prompt a question. There are lots of ways that you could use that primary source. Or even just to make sure everybody had the same understanding of how to glean information and questions from a primary source. Next slide shows one possible way to build on that question. And remember, I mocked up the question, who plays baseball? And so I selected this item from a newspaper with the headline, Girls Organized Sure Enough Baseball Club Know How to Play. And the next slide zeroes in on the text. Since I'm not teaching this is really just a model of a possibility. I'm going to pause for just a quick second, and you can come back and read this later if this particular item is of interest for you. But I'll say it's all about Miss Ida Schnall. And she was apparently quite a fascinating baseball player and general all-around athletes. But people were just amazed. This is dated 1916. And people were just amazed that girls could play baseball. So one way to begin to build on it would be to introduce primary sources such as this one and others that demonstrate who played baseball. But there are certainly other research approaches. The next slide just sums up some things to think about when launching research. It's titled Research Projects at the Library, but I think a lot of this conveys to wherever you're researching. But to take an inquiry approach, what am I curious about? to identify research paths, where can I explore to learn more? That might be additional primary sources, as I've been talking about today. There might be secondary sources that would give some context for better understanding it. Form a plan. How can I organize the information I gather, the ideas and the questions that come up? Because as adult researchers, we know that in the process of researching and learning more, we get more questions. And Charles, yeah, that would be an interesting thing to research is is to find out if there was any connection between the film A League of Their Own. Certainly there were female baseball teams, but they were a bit of a novelty almost. People, went to see the girls play baseball, not just went to see a baseball game. And then finally, a product. How can I share what I learn? And that might be a conversation or a paper or a film, a documentary, a song. There are lots of products, but this is a general approach to researching at the Library of Congress, and I would say probably just in general. The next slide is back to the homepage of the Library of Congress, and I'm going to show you a few shortcuts to finding primary sources. If I trusted the internet more, if I trusted the internet enough to be doing a live site demo, we would scroll down the homepage, and at the very bottom of the homepage, but since we're not doing this live, it's on the next slide, At the very bottom of the home page is a set of objects called free to use and reuse. And the current set is maps of cities. But if you, one more click if you would, Kathy, you'll notice up at the top where the orange circle has just popped in, there's a link to content that is free to use and reuse. That goes to previous sets because we've been doing this for, I don't know, a year and a half now. Another click, Kathy, just to get a sense of the possibilities.
That's right.
The sets range pretty broadly in topic, and they're meant to be fun and engaging. They're not built with learning, with schools necessarily in mind. So some of them are general and kind of silly topics, but even those silly topics, and you'll see it when we get there, even those silly topics have something of substance. So for example, they range from old cars, cats, African American women change makers. Cats was very popular with the internet. I think we got just a buzz on Twitter with that one. And any possibility of getting to that slide, Kathy? There we go. But even ice cream, which you can see toward the right and middle, the featured picture from this is an Asian adult male and child, and that prompts me to wonder, where were they? What was their circumstance? What was their experience in this space? So lots of possibilities here in these free to use and reuse sets. And that's a quick way to grab and go. The next slide, again, is back to the library's homepage, just to orient you. And the next click will put a box around digital collections at the bottom of the screen. And this is an access point to, if you know the collections you're looking for, this is a great place. And I want to feature my absolute favorite. Remember, former high school English teacher, the Historic American Newspapers project of chronicling America just astounds and delights me. It's a database go ahead and click through, Kathy, a cooperative project between the Library of Congress and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And their goal is to fill in the gaps of the big subscription databases. So we're not competing, we're filling in with small, mostly local newspapers. And so you can see on screen the highlights of some of the places that are good to go. So the first place I want to take you for shortcuts is the recommended topics over in the left column. And the folks who work with this, oh dear, I was doing some experimenting, and these scribbles aren't supposed to be in front of you, but you're a kind group, and you'll just say, interesting.
Cheryl, I thought I was going crazy. I didn't know what was happening.
No, I was experimenting once with something, and I thought I had cleaned it up, but clearly I hadn't. So just click through to the next slide, and hopefully we'll escape this madness.
Kathy, I just want to note that I promised you that if you piloted your new program with us, I would give you a friendly audience. So look at us being very friendly and forgiving.
Thank you, Maine Social Studies and all the Maine teachers on. Thank you.
Absolutely. If you're thinking unkind thoughts, you're at least kindly keeping it to yourself. So this is the topics page, and you can get in alphabetically or by subject category or by date range. It's the same list, just organized 3 ways. So I chose to go in by subject category. The folks who maintain these pages, next slide when you get a chance, Kathy. The folks who maintain these pages put together pages that guide you into topics, and you can see in the jump to kind of across the middle, just the range of possibilities. African American history, crimes and trials of the century, Cheryl's personal obsession, natural wonders and disasters, and then sports and American pastime. So it ranges really the gamut of what would have been in a newspaper, very serious, and then of course the more entertaining bits. And so I chose to take you into sports and American pastimes because I was personally very entertained by the next topic of ping pong. And these all have roughly the same layout. At the top of the topics page, there is a quick synopsis of what it was, and then important dates, which is really helpful when you're searching a newspaper database, and then some possible search terms. And ping pong, of course, table tennis for us grown-ups probably familiar, but craze, fad, and daft. Between 1901 and 1903, I'd have looked for a really long time before I came up with that. And then the rest of these topics pages, again, if I were doing this live, I'd just scroll down, but instead it's 2 slides. Promote some sample articles. It really is meant to be just a selection to get a researcher started and to look at some possibilities. I guarantee if you repeated the search, you would come up with this many more and even more. And I love that the chat, some of you are posting your discoveries, and I would encourage you, feel free, if you can listen with one ear and poke around on the website, share your discoveries. We love that. And I'm so glad that you found a local connection, Craig. So reorienting back to the Chronicling America homepage, that's the shortcut into the recommended topics. Scan that. If you're looking for a place to orient students and get them engaged, I think that's a good starter place to poke around a little bit. Another quick grab and go place is 100 years ago today. You can see I took this screenshot about a month ago. It changes daily, and you can arrow to the left and the right to scroll through the whole carousel. And again, this is a fun grab and go just to browse newspapers from 100 years ago and see what was happening. If you're looking for something more purposeful, it is, of course, keyword searchable. These are scanned and use, not to get too technical, use optical character recognition so that they are keyword searchable. Keep in mind that these are newspapers. Newspapers were typically not meant to be preserved, so they're often on unstable paper, and some of them, you can see the Chattanooga News there shows where the fold was, and there are some gaps in the text, so just approach it with an eye toward. It's easier than searching through rolls of microfilm, but a lot of these were in fact digitized from microfilm, so if you're of the era where that's familiar, you might recognize some of the experience. So I want to show you one more shortcut back to the home page on the next slide. And then at the bottom of the home page, you'll see an orange circle coming up for the place where Kathy and I work, the teachers page. And if you've drifted away, drift back, because what Kathy and I and the team we work with do is spend our whole professional lives trying to compiling information and resources that can make your lives easier. So I want to show you just a couple of quick entry points from the teachers page, which is on the next slide. And that would be the blog, which we're approaching 1,000 entries. We've been at this for a little bit. And Kathy, if you would just click to the next slide. I want people to be aware that up in the upper left where it says search this blog, it's a pretty good keyword search function on this. So you don't have to wait for us to guess what you're teaching about. You can keyword search. You can also use the categories down the left side. You'll see it's a little bit of eras. It's also the heritage months. We also had a couple of years ago a science teacher in residence, and in fact since then we've been having Albert Einstein Distinguished Fellows. So we have had science teachers informing our work for several years now. There's a bucket for science. There's a bucket, I noticed at least one of you works with elementary. There's a bucket for elementary, and if I recall correctly, there's at least one music teacher in the group. There is a bucket for music because last year's teacher in residence is a music teacher, and she came to help us find our way through the collections and make better use of them on behalf of music teachers. So the blog is a really terrific, searchable, easy shortcut for you, and if you're so inclined, I'd encourage you to subscribe to it. And especially, I saw a couple of you work in libraries. One of the great things for me about working with librarians in schools is you have a sense of what people are teaching, and you can be a conduit to get this materials to them. So back to the teacher's homepage on the next slide.
Cheryl, can you go back to that really quick? I just want to do a couple quick little shout outs that the blogs are fantastic. They're really well done. That I always say one of the things with the Library of Congress is there's just so many things that sometimes kind of tough to digest. But the blogs do a really nice job of giving you a perspective of different ways to navigate it, depending on what the topic is, what you're looking for, and stuff like that. So I would encourage people to check those out because I think they're fantastic. And I do want to give a shout out because I do see that the post there is by Jen Riddle, who is an iCivics member with me. And to thank her, she's the one who actually first connected me with Kathy because of her work here. So recognizing that she helped us make the connection to get us here today as well. So
thanks for that shout out, Joe. And we always, of course, love fan mail. But one of the things that I like about the blog is it's also an easy way for you to communicate to us what you're finding effective and even what you're struggling with, so that it can be conversational and a rich place where teachers can share their work together. The next place on the teacher's page I want to take you is the classroom materials. And Kathy, if you do one click, the magic orange circle will go up to the left nav around classroom materials. And I want to show you that menu and highlight one possibility here. And those are the primary source sets. We have lesson plans as well, and some of our earliest materials published on the teacher's page were lesson plans written by teacher teams. So the lesson plans are solid. They were classroom tested before they were published. But when we talked to teachers about how they used the lesson plans, it sounded really familiar to how I would use somebody else's materials back when I was teaching. I was looking for ideas, I was looking for materials, and then I wrote them into my own lesson plans, right? And so with that in mind, we said, well, if teachers are just picking them apart, they want teaching ideas and primary sources, why don't we give them that and let teachers write their own procedures? And so out of that came the primary source sets. So I'd like to show you the top of the menu on the next slide, just to give you a sense of the range of topics. Again, they go all over the gamut. Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton, because the Library of Congress has the Hamilton papers, and one of our colleagues is a Hamilton fanatic. So she had a really good time compiling that primary source set. And then you'll see toward the bottom of the screen the baseball set that we looked at earlier. And then the last one in this list, but this really is just the top snip. There are about 3 dozen of these. Children's lives at the turn of the 20th century. That is made specifically with younger grades children in mind. And so let's take a quick tour of the baseball primary source set again. I want to show you some of the features of this. The last time we looked at this page, it was just to get a sense of, oh, there are more objects. So one more click, Kathy. The magic orange box is around the analysis tool and guides. That 3-column tool that we looked at that had our answers sorted into lives there. And then next click, Kathy, if you would. In addition to the analysis tool, which you can get in PDF that's printable, or you can do an online version that students can send entirely electronically. So there are 2 options for that. And then there are a set of teachers' guides, analyzing primary sources, just generally questions that are good to ask if you're analyzing primary sources, but then questions specific to the different formats as well, if you have students that you want to take deeper into thinking about particular formats. And these were all compiled in conversation with the curators who have custody of the different kinds of objects. And they're all laid out exactly like that primary source analysis tool: observe, reflect, question. And what I typically do is select a question or 2 from each column with an eye toward, so what kinds of thinking do I want the learners to do today? And obviously what we did today was just very quick, a very quick model. We could go much deeper. So back to the teacher's homepage on the next slide. And I want to show you just a quick tour of the professional development. So you will see that in the left nav. And there's a fair bit there, but earlier today I mentioned that earlier in our program I mentioned that at 2 today, our colleague is going to do a tour of the Jefferson Building. Next click, Kathy. And that's through the online office hours that we are hosting every Tuesday and Thursday at 2. This is new. This was not something we were doing before the virus dictated that it's best if we don't show up in the office. Next click will bring up the current week's menu. Today we're touring the Jefferson Building and talking about ways to use the building itself as a primary source. And then on Thursday, Jen Rydell, whom Joe mentioned earlier as the connection here, is joining with staff from the law library to talk about Law Day, which is May 1st, Friday. And they'll be talking about both what resources does the library have and what are some effective strategies for teaching with it. So I want to conclude on this next slide by leaving you, I've thrown a lot at you. And when you introduced yourselves, many of you said that you were fairly new to the Library of Congress. And what I want to leave you with is an orientation. This is actually back to the library's front page. And if I were to click on, there are 3 horizontal lines at the upper right, now represented and replaced by that X. If I clicked on the horizontal lines, I get this menu. And one more click, Kathy. I'm tickled that the homepage itself, as well as the menu, is currently spotlighting the library's Ask a Librarian service. If you get totally lost, yeah, go ahead to the next one. Just a slide of useful links. If you get totally lost and can't find what you're looking for, you can use that Ask a Librarian. I've included my email address here just because if it's something specific to this presentation, that might be the most efficient route for you to take to get to me. But I can also say that if you lose my email address, just remember to go to Ask a Librarian and go to Resources for Teachers. And we're a small office, we're a small group, and if your question says something like, I'm a teacher in Maine and I was at this webinar and Cheryl showed me a something and I can't find that something, my colleague Dana, who staffs that, will say, oh, that was Cheryl and Kathy. Hey, Cheryl, what did you show these people? So there are lots of ways to get to us. So we have about 5 minutes left. Whew, I'm going to draw breath and invite you to either text chat or voice. What questions do you have? Things you'd like to go back to? Things that you'd like to see more of? Since I've gone through this fast orientation, Kathy said earlier she was willing to do some live modeling if that's helpful. So what are you wondering about? Jen, thanks for that shout out. Yeah, the primary source sets, Lex, are a terrific entry point. If you're really just looking for, how do I get started with this? That's a fabulous place to go. And Kathy has pasted all the URLs in the chat, and we'll also send those to Joe so he can post them. The starting places that I would recommend are the primary source sets, and poke around on the blog a little. And then if you're just looking for some fun, this is me, former English teacher. I love the newspapers because they're just so quirky. Questions?
And I will echo what Cheryl was saying. I think also if you have the time to join us live for the office hours, it's a great place just to learn a little something that you might not know about the Library of Congress. We are in the process of posting all our recordings to that page that Cheryl sent or showed you, and really we set it up like a booth conversation. If we would see you at, say, a conference in the state of Maine, and we had our little booth there, these sessions are set up for you to ask questions and for us to show you just one little gem.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Cheryl. Everybody, I did just drop the link if you need to do the contact hours certificate. Remember to put in your correct email address. Make sure you spell your name correctly because that's what will go on the certificate. And then make sure that you answer the last question that, yes, I did finish the webinar, and it will auto-generate a certificate for you. Here's your chance. There is not an 11 o'clock on this system, so I don't know how long Kathy or Cheryl can hang on, but this is your chance to have that one-on-one direct contact with the Library of Congress. There is, Kathy, could you show the path to OOH? You guys do have the ability to unmute yourself at this point. I think I still have that set up. But feel free to jump in or put something in the chat box. Again, there's a lot of stuff. I think Cheryl's recognized and put out that she's done, very, very quick job. So if there's anything you need that little feedback on, I would take advantage of this time right now.
So Kathy is showing you the path to find the online office hours. You'll see it's in the colored carousel right there on the teacher's homepage. And that's probably the fastest path, is to go there and then click the link. I saw also in the chat a question about teaching some media literacy things. The blog is probably your best place for that. And a lot of that work is around newspapers. What I would say is go ahead and poke around the blog looking for media literacy or information literacy. Bias and perspective are good search terms there. I know because I wrote probably 3/4 of the posts on that. But if you're not finding what you're looking for on that, feel free to just email me. Yeah, thanks. Kathy is modeling a search for bias on the blog, and there are 21 results, including a couple that just point to webinars, which are not useless, but they're in the past, so they're not as helpful as some of the others. And Joe, you fully delivered on a kind audience. I mean, I'm so warmed and heartened by the kind comments in the chat. Thank you all so much for your participation and for the questions. Kathy and I are happy to stick around for a little bit if there are still questions, but we also understand if you're busy and need to move on. Whatever you need right now is just fine.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time. We have a webinar series that we're going to be announcing. We can let you know that you kind of get a sneak peek on Wednesday, May 6th at 2 o'clock. We're going to kick off a webinar series with the Right Question Institute. Joe mentioned that we're going to be working with them in Maine to develop some programming specific, bringing together the question formula technique as well as the use of primary sources. So we look forward to meeting you again when we do that with RQI, the Right Question Institute, but they will be kicking off our spring summer webinars season, which will start Friday, May 6th. So stay tuned for an update for that. We'll make sure that we get that to Joe so that you all have access to that.
So the follow-up for you guys on this one is May 14th is when the Right Question Institute will do kind of the introduction to using the question formulation technique. And then I believe we're still trying to find a date where we're going to take what you learned about the Library of Congress, what you will learn about the QFT, and then mash it all together in what is like version 2. What's the next level? If you know how to navigate the Library of Congress and you know how to use the question formulation technique, what does that mean altogether? And I continue to offer Maine as a place that we've had a lot of these webinars and we have a very friendly audience, and that if they're beta testing, we would be very forgiving to any issues along the way. So I'm glad you guys were very nice today, because that's what I've been promising them.
So yeah, and the one thing that I want to point out is, you know, Cheryl did a fantastic job of doing a 101 and showing how to get access to resources. The library can overwhelm any room anytime because we just have more and millions and millions and millions, and we know for educators it's too much. And so what our job is to make sense out of the millions and millions and to serve them in smaller chunks and allow you access and success. And then what we try and do is to look at the different teaching strategies that are in the field. And that's how we got with the Right Question Institute. We've worked with the Stanford History Education Group. We are big fans of Making Thinking Visible from Project Zero. So we tend to incorporate what you guys are already using in your instructional practice and just sharing it with a larger audience and showing how to use primary sources instructionally. So it's a work we all love, and we really want to be able to support you as you guys are moving through so many different pressures right now and trying to help so many different kinds of students and so many different media. You know, we want to be able to provide those supports. So we do appreciate your time with us. We do appreciate what you do, and we want to provide a value. And so we thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
And this is Cheryl, one last word that I should just make sure you know, and you know this if you think about it for even a second, that these are the raw materials of history. And though teachers and students use this website and can find great value in it, it wasn't curated with you in mind. So it is the good, the bad, and the ugly. My colleague who staffs the Ask a Librarian is fond of saying there is something to horrify everybody at the Library of Congress. Offend and horrify, I think, is her phrase. And that's true. It is the history, not sanitized, not cleaned up, not curated. So just be aware of that, especially if you're working with younger grade students. You wanna set them up for success with that. I don't see any other questions. So I'm just going to put my email address in the chat one more time and then invite you, use that if it's helpful. Thank you again. And I'm going to, unless somebody puts a question in super quick, I'm going to go on and get ready for the next meeting and let you do the same.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you, Kathy. Before I end the recording, let's get a big thank you on the record to the Library of Congress. And like I alluded to earlier, there's been a lot of back planning to get this set up, but hopefully it is kind of this ongoing series now where Maine can help make the Library of Congress just a little bit better through the work that you guys are doing. Maine, as you know, is always one to lead the way, so we are happy to help.